I knew this would happen. You're trying to record a podcast and here comes a cat. Does the cat get picked up on the microphone? This is Charlie the cat. So Charlie is our
I can hear it when the cat's tail hits the microphone.
Oh, that's not good. Charlie is our only internal threat that our company has ever had. He has accidentally deleted an API key by rolling on my keyboard, and he deleted an API key, and I had to set everything up again.
Oh no, Charlie!
Yes. But that's some of the joys of using software as a service, and that's something that we discuss here at the SaaS Showdown. So my name is Colin McCarthy, and I have the pleasure to talk to you today with
Rose Layton. Hi.
How are you doing there, Rose? Is it nice and sunny there up in the northwest?
I guess you could call it nice and sunny. Yeah. We had a couple of 80-degree
days last week, and then it rained all weekend. So pretty standard.
That isn't good. It's been very much the same here in the Northeast. We are obviously both based in North America, working on the East Coast, and Rose is over on the West Coast. So I work for a large advertising agency. I'm the head of the IT. What field and position are you in, Rose?
Well, I'm a SaaS apps administrator in a mid-sized nonprofit. So specifically working in the workforce and economic development fields.
Excellent. So when we say we've got different backgrounds, different history, different generations, even. So
yeah,
a mix of viewpoints and experiences. So hopefully that's going to help fuel our discussion and pose some good questions as we carry on with the SaaS Showdown. So what is SaaS? Software as a service. Would you be interested to know what the Wikipedia definition of it is?
Sure. Go ahead. Hit me.
Software as a service is a software licensing and delivery model in which software is licensed on a subscription basis and is centrally hosted. It is sometimes referred to as on-demand software and was formerly referred to as software plus services by Microsoft. So,
interesting.
Yeah, and SaaS and the SaaS ops, the operation of SaaS, is something that you and I take for granted, but it always wasn't there.
That's very true.
So, and I had posted a question online the other day, asking people when was their first experience of SaaS and software as a service, and when did they first hear about it and start using it. And the range of dates was from 2002, quite early on, to only very recently when somebody had changed the position and became responsible for Google Workspace. So, Rose, what was your first experience with SaaS?
Ooh, yeah. When we sat down to write lay down this podcast, I thought about whether or not I had any earlier experiences with SaaS. And honestly, prior to starting to use Google in about 2004, I think the only other instance of SaaS I might have potentially used, it depends on your definition of SaaS, but might have been RuneScape.
RuneScape? Isn't that a game?
It was a game you played, but you paid for it as a subscription.
Right.
And it was 24/7 up, and you didn't host your own server or anything. They hosted the servers for you. And so, I'm pretty sure it fits the definition of SaaS.
Did you have a client installed, though?
No.
And if you have a client...
Played it right out of the browser.
Right. Oh, wow.
Yep.
I will have to look that up. And obviously you mentioned 2004. I'm assuming that's the use of Gmail.
Yeah, the high school that I went to used Google for Education, as it was. I think it was just Google Apps at the time. The high school I used Google for Education though, so that's when I got a personal Gmail account. But it's also the same time that I started high school.
Wow, there's some difference.
Yeah, in 2004.
Difference in ages there.
Yeah, and so and then when I went to college, we also used Google for Education. So just kept using it and never looked back. Yeah, I don't think I've had Word installed on my computer in like over a decade. Okay, so that's where I first encountered SaaS that I think of. RuneScape seems like an odd example, but Google is definitely one. So what about you, Colin? What were your first experiences with SaaS?
So I think so obviously I used Gmail when it first came out in 2004, I think it was. So that would be one of my first usages. But I think the first time I was really aware of it, so in the early 2000s, I was very into Linux. Was a member of a Linux user group and was installing Linux and all the Linux applications. And I heard about Basecamp, the project management application, and how you could run your project management tasks in a browser, and you could subscribe to a service and do everything in the web browser. And I thought to myself, well, that's not very good, because then I could only access my data when I've got an internet connection. And I spend, a lot of time commuting on the train, and I wouldn't have access to that data on my laptop. But if I installed, an open source project management application on my laptop, I would have access to my data all the time. So that's the first time I really became aware of software as a service and the ability to run, key pieces of your application. Key pieces of your software as an application that you would just have in the cloud. And obviously back then with, internet connectivity.
I was going to say, what year was that?
That was probably 2003, 2004, maybe.
Before smartphones really became a thing.
Yes.
Easily,
yeah. 3G had only, I think, recently been out. I had a Nokia cell phone, which is probably still in a drawer close by to me. And I and people had WAP pages, and you'd have a very small browser. And I remember agonizing over, did I need internet on my cell phone? It was going to cost me an extra £5. Obviously, I was living in the UK. That's where I'm originally from. I was in the UK at the time, and I was like, it's going to cost me extra £5 a month. Do I really need internet on my phone?
And it was probably only going to be 500 megs maybe a month. That was going to be your allotment.
Oh yes, yeah, but the speed.
Yeah, I was going to say. I remember when we were hearing about that.
256K or something like that. But instantly, I think obviously the growth of those software as a service applications has been enabled by internet everywhere.
Right.
But
it's striking,
back in the day,
right, that your opinion of Basecamp, like now it's a very accepted SaaS application, but at the time you were like, I wouldn't be able to access that when I'm commuting on my laptop. Like,
yes,
why would I use that?
Yeah. It's interesting how things have changed. And I remember the first actual application that I used and then adopted and embraced was a collaboration piece of software called Writely, which a friend of mine in the Linux user group had suggested. Let's use this, and we can collaborate on some ideas that we had. And I used that application. Obviously, you signed in with your Google account, and lo and behold, I think in 2006, a couple of years later, Google bought Writely for I think 10 million. If memory serves me correctly, and that became Google Docs. And I still have a Google Doc that was last edited in 2006.
I know. We talked about this a couple of days ago.
And 15 years old. I have a Google Doc that is 15 years old. I feel next year I should give it a sweet 16 party. I don't know. I don't know what's inside this Google Doc, but there it is. It exists.
I think you're gonna have to download it for the masses and tell us.
I don't know. I'm not sure if that action would change the last modified date. I can't risk it. Maybe I need to use another old one, maybe from 2017 or something, and see if doing the download adjusts the modified
like
date. Modified date. Yeah. but it's.
So, we obviously were in very different places in our lives when SaaS started, right? And when it really started to take off. But like we had similar experiences in that, you know, if you don't have internet everywhere all the time, like I used RuneScape, but not very often and not for very long because my parents really didn't like me hogging the internet connection. Because that was back when like you were online and the phone wasn't working. We didn't have broadband until I was in high school, but was it broadband? I don't even know. Whatever the
DSL.
first version of was it DSL? The first version of internet that like didn't bork your phone connection, didn't play that beautiful.
Probably it did come down the did come down the twisted pair, which would have been DSL, digital subscriber line,
right?
Which could, I think you could get 1.2 meg down.
I don't even remember thinking about speeds at that point. You know, I remember how long
anything faster than a modem.
Yeah. And I think today it would be right. We are doing this podcast on Zencastr, which is effectively software as a service, right? This is performing an audio recording for us. It's doing
everything's in the browser. Version. We have installed nothing.
And although they can't see it, we are looking at each other's videos right now, which would have been almost unthinkable back then. To watch each other in real time while we were recording audio to the cloud.
Would never be the bandwidth for that. So I remember I used Microsoft NetMeeting. I had a web camera which I bought in 1998 with my first laptop. It was an Epson. It was an Epson or a Kodak camera. It cost me like $300. It was like 320 by 240 resolution. And then Microsoft had an application called NetMeeting. And I think I only ever talked to one random person on a video call. And obviously it was always tiny pictures and very grainy.
I remember the first time I did ever like Skype call with somebody.
Would you call Skype a software as a service? So here's the
software as a service, didn't it?
But here's the thing, and this is the clarification that I'm not too sure on. Is software? Would you classify software as a service applications as only applications that run in the browser, or would something that had a client but was a subscription model or a free web-based application but did have a client, like Slack? Slack is a SaaS application, but it can use a client.
I would say
it has
to
Zoom.
Work in the browser, right? Although that would exclude lots of things because like Zoom's web client is not very good. I would say it's pretty bad most of the time, but I don't know. Yeah, because I was thinking about that earlier, and I was like, I feel like anything that has a web-based version is a SaaS application. But are things that don't have web browser versions not SaaS applications? Because Skype for Business would turned into Teams, which is very clearly SaaS. But is there a web version available for those? Were there web versions available for Skype? I don't know that there ever were.
No. This was one of the big complaints. There was no web version. I think later on you could join link calls in a browser, but it didn't work on Chrome OS, which was a problem for me because it required a plugin that was only available, I think, through Internet Explorer. They have their sort of little helper applications to get them started. So it wouldn't be a true browser-based, SaaS-based application.
We use cloud phone systems now that have, like, they work entirely out of the web. Like, the apps are optional. You don't need the... And I think a lot of that has been enabled by the progressive web app technology, right? Like being able to really host an application in the browser. And not all companies and not all applications have adopted it, but I think it has changed how SaaS works and how SaaS delivery works.
Right, yes. And the one good thing about that is it does allow you to, I guess, almost applicationize your SaaS application. So if you do have Gmail and you want it to be in its own separate window, you can do that if you want to do that with Calendar. So you have a sort of a Microsoft Office experience with Gmail, with it being in its own standalone browser window. You can do that. And I know some people that do that. And obviously, there was, for anybody who's a long-term user of Google Apps for Business, that there used to be an installer that would install those shortcuts, and then you would load Gmail in a separate browser. It was like a menu. It was what do they call it? A windowless browser. So you didn't have all of the options at the top. So yeah.
Well, and if you use a Chromebook and another computer for a while, you would basically end up with these like Google app downloads. And I actually have a bunch on my computer. They don't work anymore. They're like Drive, Docs, Sheets. The Keep one still works for a little while, but every time I open it, Google gets mad at me and tells me that it's going away very, very soon. Which is interesting because it seems like a lot of there are applications that are discontinuing their web browser portion, and there are applications that are discontinuing their desktop portion. Do you think we're going to see some more standardization there? Like, do you think we're all eventually going to just bite the bullet and get desktop versions, or do you think everything's going to get pushed towards the web? How do you feel about that?
So obviously, Google could never do an installed version of Gmail, and I'm surprised they didn't. No, I would. Obviously, there's like Zoom and Slack installed applications. I don't think Google will ever do a Gmail, HTML5 type client. I was surprised they didn't. I thought they would. I thought it would be an easy way to do Gmail offline, but they've been able to do that in Chrome. But you could say that Chrome is their installed application, because obviously everything in Google Workspace, Gmail, Docs, etc. is enhanced by using Google Chrome. So that probably is its installed application. Certainly for Meet, initially Google Meet, Google Hangouts would only work in Chrome. When they removed that Hangouts helper application, or the Hangouts application that you'd have, or driver you'd have to initially install. I think it's going to depend on the application and its industry. I don't like applications because you have to patch them and you have to deploy them. And often, like we discovered the other day, an application update to say Zoom can take something away. A recent, so when are we recording this? End of April of 2021. A recent Zoom update on the Mac has removed the ability to do virtual backgrounds on older Macs. So if you've got a Mac from 2014 or 2015 and you update Zoom, you can no longer do virtual backgrounds, which is a little bit annoying. And we have to weigh up the pros and cons. Well, what was fixed over what do people still want to carry on using?
Right.
So I think it can be problematic. Obviously, an installed
Zoom
application
has their own opinions about which computers are suitable to run their application.
Maybe they're in cahoots with trying to get people to upgrade and say, "Oh, I need a new Mac because I can't run a virtual background."
It's more likely that they just don't have any old Macs in their organization, so they were like, "Oh, nobody needs this, right?" Yeah.
Possibly. But yeah, if the hardware device can still run a modern OS, then there's no reason to update it. But it is some of those nice to have features that get cut out. So, how about you? Where do you see browser versus applications going?
Well, I mean, I run a pretty significant number of applications. Zoom being one of them, Slack being another. When I was invited into a Google Hangout chat room, whatever they're called these days, I immediately installed the application version, which is really just a Chrome window is what it is. It's just a little shortcut to a Chrome window. But just because I'm used to using Slack that way. But then, I agree with what you said, right? That if you have a installed application, it's something that has to be patched. It's something that has to be managed. And I think as IT people, we can agree that patch management and patching can be a very cumbersome thing to manage in this day and age. And so, I'd like what I would like is I would like to see the web version become less of the bastard child, I guess. It's kind of a way to say that.
Yes. It does sometimes seem to be like it's a second-class citizen to the
right.
Full desktop
it doesn't have it's not on experience. It's
not complement of features.
Yeah. So in Zoom's web version, there are absolutely no hosting controls. You cannot host a meeting from Zoom in the web. You have to use the client. And then, but there are things like Slack that you don't even really notice the difference, except for it's sort of crowded among, my 97 tabs. And that's really probably honestly the reason I use a desktop app instead for Slack is because I have a million tabs open all the time. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting issue because I also use Chrome OS in our organization. And I see often that, even the Android version of some apps is prioritized over the web version of those apps. And those changes are not always carried over to Chrome OS, which I would say that Chrome OS is probably one of the most secure operating systems available on the market.
Yes, agreed.
Because of how it is set up. But I would like to see more things work with it and work well with it. And not be weird virtualizations of Windows environments in within Chrome itself. And so I don't know. I'd like to see both. I really would, because I think a lot of the users that we have, people will ask me, well, is there a desktop application for this? Well, no, there's not. I'm not really sure why you want one, but
and are those requests for a desktop application coming from more mature people who might be used to using a physical installed application?
I don't know if I would necessarily use their age to classify them out, but I will say they are former Microsoft users.
Right.
So
okay.
It's a philosophy that definitely comes from that. as opposed to, people who like me who have been using Google for a decade, whether I've been working in it from a personal perspective or from school or from work. I would never expect there to be a desktop application for something. I would just be like, well, where is it? How do I get to it? And then that's that. But I've done a lot of migrations in my time, and people who are used to Microsoft Office often do ask for desktop applications of SaaS, even though that's not normally what I would think of.
No. So it's a pre.
And even I will say
prior experience is judging or influencing their new experience with a cloud-based SaaS application.
The one thing about the Gmail application that you brought up, like Google may never actually make one, but the one group of people who might want one that doesn't fit into that, like previously Microsoft, are people who use Apple Mail.
Right. But then, yes, that's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other thing.
Of should you have IMAP installed? No, enabled. No, you shouldn't. Same for POP or even the Outlook sync on Windows.
Right.
So we're getting close to 30 minutes. The start of our first podcast about a SaaS Showdown. I think we've gone on.
Do you have anything profound to end it off with?
Yes, we do need something like that. Closing thoughts, Jerry Springer style. If anybody used to watch that in the 80s or 90s. I've never watched it. I just remember that he always had his closing thoughts or final thoughts. But obviously, we've talking about our first experience and awareness of SaaS. It went from myself not wanting to use a cloud-based application because I would not have access when I didn't have an internet connection and I wanted it locally hosted. Obviously, the internet being available everywhere has changed that and obviously really spearheaded the adoption of SaaS. And then we've gone maybe not back a little bit, but there is still this perceived notion that if you're working in an application, it needs an installer. It needs its own separate icon on the desktop or the taskbar, and it needs its own little window. So, it's going to be interesting to carry on the discussion on some more episodes, different areas of SaaS, and we carry on the showdown.
Yeah, let's do it.
Produced by the Tab Geeks Network. Enjoy all of our shows on YouTube at youtube.com/tabgeeks. Join our exclusive, free, no sponsors allowed Slack community and sign up for our newsletter at tabgeeks.com.